Good morning. My name is Stephanie, and I will be reading Revelation 2, 8 through 11 this morning. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, "These are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death."
God bless the reading of his word. Thank you, Stephanie. Well, if you were to walk through the ancient city of Smyrna, you would find a place full of beauty and culture and Roman pride. This city, above probably all of the other cities we are going to be looking at in this series 7, was dedicated to Rome. They were a city-state. They really cared about impressing Rome. They actually had the Roman goddess Roma, which was the goddess of all Rome. The temple was there in Smyrna. And it was a port city on the Aegean Sea. It was rich and loyal, devoted to the emperor. Once a year, citizens lined up to burn incense and declare that Caesar is Lord. But for followers of Jesus, that was a line that they couldn't cross. And because of that decision, as we're going to see, they lost really everything. Their jobs, their homes, friends, sometimes even their lives. They had nothing that the world valued, but everything that heaven honors. And that's hard for most of us to imagine. Because if we're honest, we live in what's often called the most comfortable time period in all of human history. We're comfortable, right? We're in this room with properly conditioned air and padded seats. We have televisions that turn on when we tell them to. Sometimes we don't even tell them to and they do it. Right? We have computers and coffee pots that just run. You can go through a drive-through and food is just given to you. Or if you don't even want to leave your home, you can just Uber it and someone will bring you food. We live in the most comfortable time period in all of human history. Stanford University did a recent study that revealed that everything has become so easy for us that we're actually increasingly uncomfortable when something happens. We're so conditioned to be comfortable that when anything happens out of the ordinary, we freak out. We're so used to having things our way. It's not convenient, or if it's not convenient, we also are often say that we are suffering, right? But comfort, if we're not careful, can become something that we value too much. And the danger of comfort is that it dulls our senses to what God is really laying before us. And the church in Smyrna, they didn't have that luxury. They couldn't choose comfort, so instead they chose Christ. And Jesus writes this letter to remind them and to remind us that faith isn't proven in our comfort, but it's proven under pressure. And we're in the third week of our series 7 as we look at the first few chapters of the book of Revelation. And if you remember, just a quick recap, this letter was written to 7 churches that we're talking about each week. The second week we talked about Ephesus. The first week we talked about the point of Revelation that we're going to get to in a moment. But this was written, the words of Jesus given to his best friend here on earth, the Apostle John, as John was imprisoned on the island of Patmos for living a life that was anything but comfortable. He wrote this from a vision that Jesus gave to him. And it was written to remind believers of one thing. It wasn't written to talk to us necessarily just about what's going to happen in the future. We look at Revelation often as just the book that talks about the end times, and it does talk about the end times, but as we've seen, it has something for us here today. In Revelation, it wasn't written just to scare us, right? Actually, it shouldn't scare us. It should embolden us. But Revelation was written to reveal Jesus. We saw that in our first week. The whole first chapter is revealing Jesus and setting the stage for this incredible letter. It wasn't written just for us to be able to find out what's going to happen in the future, or even what's happened in the past, or what's happening right now. But Revelation was written to reveal Jesus. Revelation is the book of prophecy, but it isn't just about things that are come. Things to come. It's written and it includes words for us today on how to live. We saw in Revelation 1:3, God blesses the one who reads the words of this prophecy. Stephanie did that for us this morning to the church. And he blesses all who listen, all of us, to its message. And here is the key of Revelation, the thing that we often miss. John, given these words by Jesus, is telling us the point of this book. And obey what it says, for the time is near. So we're looking each week, what can we obey from this? Amidst all the symbolism and things that sometimes confuse us in the book of Revelation, we're going to look at the first couple chapters, these 7 letters to these 7 churches that Jesus sent to these real life churches, and say, what can we obey in there? So for these 7 weeks, we're looking at what Jesus shares with the church, not just to figure out when or how the world is going to end, but we're focusing on what we need to obey. And last week, we looked at the first of these letters to the church in Ephesus. That church, if you remember, was booming with activity. They were standing on the truth. They had their doctrine in order. They were doing great ministry. But they had lost what Jesus called their first love. They were busy for God, but they had lost their motivation. They were simply, as we talked about last week, going through the motions. And the encouragement for us is to not lose our first love. Amidst all of the wonderful things that we're doing and all of the study that we do of the word to make sure we understand it, that our doctrine as a church is right, that we make sure our motivation is always pure, and that's to do it out of love. In this second week, this letter sent by John, written by Jesus, contains a message for the second church, Smyrna. You're going to see a map up here on the screen. We see that John started in Patmos, or he was in Patmos, in prison, and he sent this letter to the first of the churches, Ephesus, and now we're moving on this trade route, this route that was often used for postal delivery. You can see it makes its way across what was called Asia Minor, but for us, this is modern-day Turkey, went to the second church in Smyrna, and that's what we're going to look at this morning. Now, Smyrna was one of the most beautiful cities in all the Roman Empire. You're going to see a picture up here, an artist's depiction of what they think this might have looked like. There's another picture here coming up. It's on this beautiful seaboard here. It's a luxurious, wealthy, amazing town. It was known for its stunning harbor, its wealth, and as I said earlier, its loyalty to Rome. If Ephesus, as we talked about, maybe was New York, then Smyrna's like the Hamptons, right? This is a beautiful place where everybody wants to go. It was the second largest city only to Ephesus, and they often competed with Ephesus to get attention. And they did that by really, really bowing down to Rome. Smyrna is in what's known modern day as Myrrh. You're going to see a picture here of some of the ruins that still exist. Unlike Ephesus, that was it's torn down in rubble, there are some amazing things that still exist. Here you can see it amongst the modern city of some of these ruins. You'll see a picture here of the nightlife of Izmir. It's a booming, beautiful town. And finally, we have this picture here. It looks like a place that I'd want to go. What about you? It looks a lot different than Ephesus. In Smyrna gets its name. Its name comes from the word myrrh. Makes sense, right? Smyrna, myrrh. Many of you might know myrrh. You might be reminded of that from reading your Bible. Of course, one of the gifts that Jesus was brought when he was born was gold, frankincense, and myrrh, right? In this, you see it up here on the screen. This is derived from trees that would grow in the area. And this myrrh was extracted, and as we're going to see in a moment, it plays a big part in this letter that Jesus has for this city. It's going to matter. The city of Smyrna was destroyed around 600 BC. And later it was rebuilt by Alexander the Great after he had a dream. He had a dream to rebuild this church or this city, to bring it back from the dead. So the theme from death to life ran deep in the city. That's exactly how Jesus introduces himself to this church. If you remember, each letter, Jesus takes a characteristic that he's already talked about in the first chapter that we went through in the first week and unpacks that in a specific way that this church needs to hear about who Jesus is. So we see in Revelation 2, verse 8, to the angel of the church in Smyrna. If you remember, the angel we most likely think is the leader, the human leader. They were often called angels, the messengers of God who would proclaim to the righteous. And so to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. These words would mean something to the Smyrnan people because their city had been brought from death to life. And he says, I am the first and the last. I was here before and I'll be here after. There's a phrase that we used to use in tech ministry called philo. It meant first in, last out. And it meant that the people who were really in charge of things were going to be the first people in and the last people out. And Jesus is saying, this is me, I'm Philo. I'm the first one and I'm the last one. And I died and came back to life. This ties back to a verse we read in the first week in Revelation 1:5. It says that Jesus was if we've claimed the name of Jesus Christ, as we're going to see today, we are going to again rise from the dead. And I mentioned last week that each of these letters has a rhythm. It's 4 P's. It opens with praise and then presents the problem, then the prescription, and then the promise. And this week we're going to see this same framework, although it's a little bit different than it was with the church in Ephesus. So first, let's look at the praise. The praise. But this is also the problem. You'll see in a moment. Revelation 2:9 starts off, Jesus says, I know. Each letter to every church starts off with this phrase, I know. And this isn't supposed to carry with this thing like your parent looking down at you saying, I know, like looking, to find something's wrong. It's I know, I understand. Both sometimes the good things and the bad things you're dealing with, I know. He sees them. In each of these letters, it's personal. And at the church in Smyrna, he says, I know, I see you. Remember, I'm the first and the last who died and rose. He knows because he's been through it. What does he know? He says, I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. This is his praise. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. This word afflictions, it's the Greek word philippus, and it means pressure. It means pressure, for something to feel the pressure. Your translation might say sufferings, or some of them say tribulations. I know the suffering. I know the pressure you're under. And this isn't pressure like maybe you have, a little bit of pressure at your job. This word means immense pressure. It was a word that was often used to describe how they would torture. Roman people in this time period would torture people by placing giant boulders on them, adding one after the other until they were suffocated, till they were crushed. I know you're being crushed. I know the afflictions. I know the pressure that you're feeling because of your poverty. This word poverty, it's not, sometimes we think, we say the word poor. And this means more than just being poor. Poverty is like nothing, having nothing. You are destitute. I know your pressure. You are destitute. You have nothing. See, there are people that we look at that we say those are winners in life. And then there are those that we say those are losers. And maybe it's not because of something they've done, it's just their situation. They've lost out, right? Their poverty, nothing. They don't have anything. Probably a thing that most of us could never understand. They thought of themselves this way, not as being rich, but of having nothing, of losing out in life. They lived in this booming city full of wealth and beauty, and yet the Christians there, the church there, they had nothing. James chapter 2, verse 5 says, "Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world?" The losers, right? Those who haven't won the lot in life, to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised for those who love him. Paul goes on in 2 Corinthians 6:10, he says, "Our hearts ache, but we always have joy. We are poor, but we give spiritual riches to others. We own nothing, and yet," here's the paradox, "we have everything." He's echoing Jesus, or Jesus echoes his words here when he says, you have poverty, but you are rich. Most people who have nothing don't consider themselves rich. But he knows. He knows what's going on with these people. So why were the Christians so poor? Why do they have nothing? Well, history tells us that this city that was so booming, it was booming with trade and business and loyalty to Rome, that because of these Christians' faith, because of the belief and the hope and the trust they had in Jesus Christ, they were shunned by the people around them. Not so much by the Romans, but by their fellow Jews. If you know much about your history, you know, even from the Gospels and seeing Jesus interact, so much of the Jewish people denied Jesus. They thought he was tainting their religion. We often read about those in the Gospels of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law and the people that would not accept Jesus as the Son of God. And so these Jews, they didn't accept these believers in Jesus. And so they shunned them, we're going to see in a moment. And by doing that, they made it hard for them to have jobs. They barred them from trade. They were in what we would call today cancel culture, right? They had nothing to do with them. And so the church in Smyrna experienced afflictions of poverty, yet Jesus says they are rich. So what else does Jesus know? Revelation 2:9. He says, "I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan." This is what I was just talking about. The slander, the things that the Jews would tell, many of the Jews would say about these Christians to stir things up. The slander, the rumors. You can read in history about what some of those are. They were crazy, right? Like we took communion earlier this morning as the first century church did. And they would say, these Christians, they get together and they eat flesh and drink blood. They call each other brothers and sisters. There's something weird going on, that they don't care about family, which Rome cared a lot about family. Slander after slander to make these Christians look bad. Rome honestly could, at that point, have cared less about Christians, as long as they didn't cause trouble and paid their taxes. But the Jews, they stirred things up for them. And these Jews, they would pay a tax to the Roman government. And that tax allowed them to continue to practice their Jewish culture, as long as they would also, as we've talked about over the last couple weeks, bow down to the emperor. But these Jews, they began to slander. They began to talk poorly, to make it difficult for the Christians that were living in Smyrna. And what Jesus is saying is that they call themselves Jews, but they're not. There's several different passages that we can read in the New Testament, Romans 9, verse 6 in particular, says this, well then, has God failed to fulfill his promise to Israel? No, for not all of those who are born into the nation of Israel are truly members of God's people. And all throughout the New Testament, we see these kinds of words, that this isn't Jesus declaring some racism against the Jews. He's saying that being Jewish isn't so much about your culture and your heritage, it's about your heart. Are you accepting? Are you living as God's children, as his chosen people? That now, through Jesus, he's revealed to not just the Jewish community, but to all people. And Jesus is saying here that these people, they claim to be Jews, but they're not really acting like it. They're not accepting the one true God and his Son. And so he calls them the synagogue of Satan. You can see some of the persecution that I've just talked about. We're not going to have time to read it this morning, but in Acts 17, if you want to read that. It talks about some of the trouble that the Jewish people were causing for the Christians. But why does he call them a synagogue of Satan? I mean, they didn't have a synagogue with a name on it that said Satan's synagogue, right? He's trying to make a point. And here's what I think his point is. Not only that they really aren't following the one true God, but I think Jesus is wanting us to understand that even though these Jews have got it wrong, and he hates what they're doing, he wants us to not hate the people. All throughout Scripture, we see reminders that we're to love our enemies. In Ephesians 6, verse 12, he says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world's forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Jesus is reminding us, yes, these Jews are doing to you, but somebody else is really at work here. Don't hate these Jews. This is Satan at work. So what does Jesus tell us that he knows? He knows the three weights, the afflictions, the struggles that this church is going through: poverty, slander, and we're going to see next the persecution. Revelation 2:10, he says, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil, not Rome, not these Jews that are working, conspiring against him. He says the devil. He wants to remind us who's really at work here, who's really pulling the strings. The devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Let's look at this for a second here. For 10 days, there's been a lot of discussion throughout the years with scholars that are much smarter than I of what this means. Some people say it means a season. 10 different seasons of persecution the church will go through. Some say it was phases or different time periods. Could be, decades or generations, 10 generations. Some people say, well, maybe it just means 10 days. I don't really know the answer, but I know the point. The point Jesus is saying here is that you will suffer. You will suffer persecution, but only for a season. It's not for your whole life. There'll be a time where you endure persecution. We think, wait a minute, but I thought he knows. He knows what we're going through. He knows what's happening. He knows what's happening to this church. Why is he going to allow this persecution? Even if it's just for a season. Why will he allow Christians to suffer? Why does he allow the things that happen in your life? If he knows the things that's happening in your marriage, if he knows, why is he allowing it to happen? The disease in your body, why is he allowing that to happen? The problems in your family, the problems around the world, the problems in this country. Why isn't he doing something about it if he knows? He's allowing your suffering and the suffering of others to what? To test you. To test you. Now we need to understand what Jesus means when he says testing here. This isn't like some bad school teacher that's trying to stump you, right? Or your parents trying to give you a test to see if you really are good enough or something. This isn't that kind of testing. A good teacher, what do they use tests for? To try to help you become better. Authority figures might test you in a bad way, but Jesus isn't trying to mess you up or to catch you messing up. So this church is being tested. Testing often has this idea of refining, of being crushed, putting something under pressure to help it become what God truly wanted it to become. The church we looked at last week, Ephesus, it had lost its first love. This church in Smyrna, it shows us what happens when you don't lose your first love. See, the first and true mark of a church, as we saw last week, is love. The second is suffering. One is the natural consequence of the other. A loving church will endure. It will be tested, persecuted. There will be struggles. Now, how is this the prescription for what we're supposed to do? How we're supposed to grow, the thing we're supposed to obey? James 1, verse 2 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." And in this suffering, in this testing, Jesus offers us the prescription for this church in Smyrna and the church for us, or in the prescription for us. And that's to do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Psalm 56:3 says, "When I'm afraid, I put my trust in what? In you." When I'm facing these trials, no matter what they might be, I put my faith and trust in you. We don't really fully understand what a church like Smyrna was dealing with. Not in our country, at least not at this point in history. But there are places in the world that do. One that comes to mind is North Korea. There's actually a lot of symbolism and lining up with what the church in Smyrna was understanding. You see a picture up here on the screen of people that are supposed to pay homage, to bow down, to worship Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader, much like a Roman emperor. They were called to bow down and worship. And so Christians are facing persecution that you and I, at least at this point in history, do not understand, but it's real. And so to help us draw a line between this church in Smyrna that's experiencing things that you and I don't, and some of the things going on today, I want you to hear a story. It's a story of a woman named Bae. Her name has been changed. And this is her story living in North Korea, accepting Jesus Christ as her Savior, and then just a little bit of what she's had to endure. Let's see Bae's story.
형제님 보시오. 우리는 주님의 은혜와 여러분의 은혜로 평안하게 잘 지내고 있습니다. 이 글을 쓰는 이 순간 내내 마음이 무겁습니다. 우리가 결코 보답할 수 없는 선물을 여러분들에게서 받았기 때문입니다. 우리가 갖고 있던 성경책은 발각되는 순간 처리되었습니다. 그리고 우리는 그리스도인이었기 때문에 머나먼 곳으로 추방되었습니다. 이제 결코 도망갈 수 없게 되었습니다. 여기서 일하는 것은 힘이 듭니다. 배급도 충분하지 않습니다. 우리는 항상 배고프고 또 아픕니다. 여기서는 살아남기 위해서 스스로 먹을 것을 찾아 나서야 합니다. 그러나 매일 아침 눈을 뜰 때 주 하나님의 임재를 느낍니다. 여전히 주의 종으로 섬길 수 있도록 강건하게 하시는 우리 아버지 하나님께 감사드립니다. 사람이 떡으로만 살 것이 아니요 하나님의 입으로 나오는 모든 말씀으로 살 것이라. 어려운 기회로 최근에 국경을 넘어 다른 그리스도인들을 만날 기회가 있었습니다. 그들은 저에게 음식과 약도 주고 또 주님의 은혜로 성경책도 주었습니다. 그곳에 있었을 때 더 머물 수 있는 기회가 있었습니다. 제가 자유로워질 수 있는 순간이었습니다. 그러나 저는 저의 가족과 교회를 저버릴 수 없었습니다. 아무리 작은 교회라도 말입니다. 여러분의 입장에서 보았을 때 우리가 고통당하는 것이 저주처럼 보일지도 모릅니다. 그러나 우리는 이것을 축복으로 압니다. 아버지께로 가는 지름길이기 때문입니다. 그러나 공교롭게도 부탁이 하나 더 있습니다. 우리를 위하여 기도하는 분들에게 우리가 얼마나 감사한 마음을 가지고 있는지 전달해 주시기를 부탁드립니다. 우리는 여기서 건강하게 잘 견디겠습니다. 그리고 북한 땅에 계속해서 주님의 복음을 전하겠습니다. 여러분의 잠에 올림.
Did you catch her phrase? I consider the persecution a blessing, a shortcut to the Father, she says. This is just one of the stories, one of the many stories that we could share, one of the very few that I could share that wasn't a little too intense for us this morning, especially with kids in the room. But we support here at Seymour Christian a group called the Voice of the Martyrs. This is a ministry, one of our ministry partners, that every time you give an offering, a percentage of that goes to help this ministry. This ministry is designed to help the persecuted church. You see their website up here on the screen, persecution.com. There's also information on our mission wall out in the lobby about that ministry, and you can scan with your phone. It'll take you to some more stories like Bay's. And I want to encourage you today, maybe this week, to spend some time on this website, persecution.com, to go and see some of the horrendous things that are happening to Christians around the world, yet they consider it a blessing. Matthew chapter 5, verse 11, Jesus says these words, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Philippians 1:29 says, "For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him." It's our birthright as believers. But what is the promise that Jesus gives to this church? There's hope here, right? It's not just you're going to be tested, you're going to be persecuted for a season. He says in Revelation 2:10, "Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown." This word victor's crown, it's the Greek word Stephanos. It sounds a lot like my name because that's where my name comes from, Stephen. It also echoes the first martyr of the church, Stephen, who was stoned. The name means victor's crown. There are two types of crowns in the Bible. The first one is what we often call diadem, and that's the crown that's worn by royalty. But there's another kind of crown. It's the victor's crown, the Stephanos, and it's the crown for the winners. The crown for the victors. You see a picture up here on the screen. In Roman times, this is what the victor's crown looked like. The laurel crown. And this crown was not given to the mighty, the people in charge, the kings. It was given to the winners. And Jesus says, you have poverty. The world considers you losers, but you are really the winners. You are the ones who win the prize. 1 Corinthians 9:25 says, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown, the Stephanos, that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. 1 Peter 5:4 says, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory, the Stephanos, that will never fade away. These Christians here in Smyrna, they never got to wear crowns. They were the rejects, the ones that had been canceled, the ones who had nothing. Not just material things, but they were being crushed, the weight crushing them. They were never the winners. Maybe you feel like that this morning. Like you're never the winner. Life has maybe dealt you what we might call a bad hand. But the church in Smyrna was promised if they would stay faithful, they will get a crown. They will be victorious. James 1:12 says, blessed is the one who perseveres under such trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. I know we're running out of time. There's a couple things I want to share with you before we close this morning. One of the most famous martyrs of all time is a man named Polycarp. This is an actual picture of him. It's a joke. Polycarp was actually the lead pastor of the church in Smyrna, the church we're talking about this morning. Now, he might not have been the pastor at the time that this letter was sent. He would have been in his mid-20s, late 20s, 30s. But most likely, he heard these words, this letter that was written to this church that was under the pressure. And if you know much about Polycarp, maybe you've heard of his story before. If not, just Google it. It's a great story. But in a nutshell, these Jews, those Jews from the synagogue of Satan, if you remember, years later, when Polycarp is in his 80s, they begin to slander him again and again. They stir up trouble, and things have changed in the Roman Empire by then, and they must declare Caesar as Lord. And these very Jews turn on him and report him. And the Roman officials, they come to his house to gather him, to imprison him, to torture him, to get him to recant Jesus and to declare that Caesar is Lord. And he says, I cannot do that. And the story goes that he asks the Roman guards if he can, before they take him away, he wants to prepare a meal for them. He wants to serve them. He wants to love them. And he wants to pray. And they're like, sure, of course, free meal, we'll let you do that. And they hear for the next 2 hours Polycarp praying even for them. And the story goes that they felt so bad, or why are we trying to take this guy away? And so they bring him to the officials, and the officials say, you're an old man, just say that Caesar is Lord and you can go. And here's his quote that's so famous. For 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How then can I blaspheme my king who saved me? He would not recant. Under immense pressure, Polycarp was burned at the stake. Well, the story goes that he actually couldn't catch on fire, that the winds blew and he didn't burn, and so they stabbed him instead. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that this man died, the leader of Smyrna, feeling the immense pressure, but he was a winner. So what does the victory look like? What does it look like for Polycarp? What does it look like for you and I? Romans 2:10 finishes and says, whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Remember, this is to all of us, not just that one church. This is to everyone. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. Remember how we started this message with us being reminded as Jesus introduces himself as the one who's the first and last, who defeated death. And he says, you will not be hurt by the second death. We talked about Revelation 1:5 earlier, that Jesus was the first to rise from the dead, but here we're talking about a second death. There's a phrase you might have heard before. I want to put up here on the screen because it's great. If you're born once, you die twice. But if you're born twice, you only die once. If you're born once, you will die twice. But if you're born twice, born again, born of the Spirit, born in Jesus Christ, you will only die once. There will be no second death. Saw a great picture of this last week here right at Seymour Christian, or last week before. One of our own, you might know him, you'll see his picture up here on the screen. Ralph Hurt gave his life to Jesus Christ. You see Jason O'Neill there, one of our elders, baptizing him. His wife Deanie right around there, and several of us were gathered here. And Ralph gave his life to Jesus Christ. He was born again. That's awesome, right? Let's celebrate that. Ralph made the decision that he didn't want a second death. He wanted to live again forever with his Lord and Savior. In John 11:25, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Ralph has a victor's crown. He'll experience life, and you can have that crown too. I've asked this question every week so far, and I want to ask again. If Jesus wrote a letter to our church, what would he say? What would he say to you? I think he would say, remember that Jesus knows. He knows your afflictions. He knows the pressure that you're feeling. He knows the pain that you're under. We don't have to hide it. He knows it because he's been going through it with us. But I think you would also say, expect something. Expect that pressure. Faithfulness has a price. Discipleship, true discipleship, will always bring friction, conflict with the world that rejects Christ. So the question isn't if you'll face pressure, it's how you'll respond to it when you do. Jesus says in John 16:33, I have told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world, you will have trouble. It's not a question of if, it's when. He says, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So know that Jesus is walking through it with you. He knows. He's the first and last. He's already defeated death. And you can expect pressure, afflictions, suffering. But I want to be comfortable. Maybe you want to be comfortable too. I want to be the winner in life, right? Not just the victor's crown later. Maybe I want to experience that comfort now. Here's a question for you to wrestle with this week. Has your desire for comfort cost you your crown? The crown that we're promised as believers. Has your desire for comfort cost you your crown? You can decide what comfort that might be. Maybe it's money, maybe it's time, maybe it's resources, maybe it's your reputation. Whatever it might be, has your desire for comfort cost you your crown? I get it. We don't face the kind of persecution that Smyrna faced. No one here, at least right now, is being thrown into prison for coming to church or risking their life like Bay for owning a Bible. But that doesn't mean that we don't face pressure, does it? It just looks different. For some of us, it's social pressure to speak up, to speak the truth in love at work, in school. Maybe you're suddenly labeled narrow-minded or judgmental or out of touch. For some of us, we face a cultural pressure to follow Jesus in a world that constantly seems to be going the other direction. It's a pressure to cut corners or to compromise. Doing the right thing often costs us. And there's pressure within our relationships. When choosing integrity sometimes means losing influence with people. Maybe our persecution isn't physical, but it's personal. And Jesus' words to Smyrna still ring true. Do not be afraid, be faithful. If you remember, I talked earlier about the word Smyrna. It comes from the word myrrh. This material is taken from a tree Myrrh is known for its beautiful fragrance. But you know how it smells? How it gets its smell? On its own, it doesn't really smell like much, but when it's under pressure, when it's smashed, this myrrh, those rocks that we showed earlier, are pressed down, they're crushed, and they give off the aroma. This church understood this. Smyrna understood this. That's Smyrna's story. And for many of us, that needs to be our story. We feel the weight of that pressure. But as we're pressed, as we're tested, as we're crushed, we can be victorious. The more the myrrh is crushed, the more beautiful the fragrance becomes. And the more your faith is tested, the more, I'm going to say this, it's just going to sound a little silly, but the more your life smells like Jesus. The aroma of Christ is given off. I want us to close our time. I know we're going over, and I appreciate you guys being able to do that with us. But I want us to take just 2 minutes and do something this morning. I want us to end our time here in prayer. And so you're going to see some prompts here up on the screen. I'm going to go through them right now. The first one is I want us to pray for those in prison for their faith. Then I want us to pray for families who have lost or are separated from loved ones because of their faith in Christ. And I want us to pray for boldness and endurance among disciples facing hostility. And then finally, I want us to pray for ourselves. Pray that you would be willing and open to endure the pressure, whatever that may look like in your life, to create the aroma of Christ. So here's what I want you to do just for 2.5 minutes. There's going to be a timer up on the screen so we don't even lose track of time. I want you alone, maybe in the privacy of you and the Holy Spirit, or with the people around you, however you want to do that. I want you to take just 2.5 minutes and pray for the persecuted church and pray for yourself. These prayers can help prompt you as you pray, but let's take just 2.5 minutes to pray for those who are enduring suffering and pray that we would be able to do the same. Let's take the time to pray.